I am Dr. Brian Thornburg. And yesterday, the USDA and the Department of Health and Human Services released a new dietary recommendation. This is a significant departure from the previous recommendations, which were carbohydrate heavy. Now we have moved into an animal fat, animal protein based diet, de emphasizing the grains that were previously recommended. And I wanted to go through the evolution of the food pyramid to MyPlate to the current inverted pyramid that was just released yesterday and discuss the science that supported each of these recommendations and also look at why this is a very positive step in terms of improving nutritional balance of proper recommendations based on how our physiology and our metabolism works. It also is underscored by the fact that the original food pyramid was carbohydrate heavy. And while it was touted to be an approach to help promote health by reducing chronic disease and obesity and diabetes, what actually happened because it was carbohydrate heavy is that we ended up with an epidemic of obesity because people were eating a lot of carbohydrates. And physiologically, metabolically, we're not intended to eat a lot of carbohydrates like this. If you remove grocery stores from our world, if we look at how our grandparents ate 100 years ago, before there was widespread refrigeration, before we could ship in avocados from halfway around the world, we ate farm to table. And if we just go through the seasons of what types of foods we can eat when we're eating farm to table, how we have eaten for centuries, millennia, up until the last 50 or 60 years, you can see that there were not a lot of carbohydrates in what was available. So in the spring, and I'm looking at more northern latitudes here. So in the spring, the first vegetable to push through is asparagus. Asparagus is known to help us detoxify. So the first food, the first fresh vegetable that comes through, it makes sense that it would help us detoxify after spending a winter eating canned foods, grains, pickled foods, salted meats. And so after hibernating, not being as active, the first thing we want to do is start to detoxify the body. And God or evolution gives us asparagus. Then we get into some of the roughages. We get into the lettuces, the kales, the shards, and some small carbohydrates in the forms of berries, strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, and some cherries, but very little in terms of carbohydrates. A lot of the roughages, the lettuces, the green leafy vegetables, they're designed after we've detoxed a little bit to help scrub the intestines, help us clean ourselves out again after we've been eating some of the foods that we had available during the winter months. Then when we move into fall, before we go and return to a less active period and a period of time where we can't go out and farm. So we're inside a lot more. And it's also cold out, so we need to have a lot of energy to keep ourselves warm and generate some heat. That's the first time in the season that we receive a lot of carbohydrates. We get the apples, pears, squashes, pumpkins, grains harvested. And so this is the first time in the year that we eat a significant amount of carbohydrates. So when you look at how we have eaten for centuries, millennia, prior to the advent of grocery stores and the USDA, and food lobbying associations, very little carbohydrates. The seasons provided the foods that we needed so we could eat in a way that was appropriate for the time of year that we were in. And once we developed the grocery stores and we could access foods at any time of the year, then we moved away from this natural, appropriate feeding regimen and into more of a feeling-based feeding regimen. And of course, we know that the food industry is very powerful. And so in that original food pyramid, they heavily lobbied to have foods that were subsidized by the US government, such as grains and corn, to be represented heavily on the food pyramid, because that generated more profit for them and it was also easier to grow. So they made more money, it was easier to provide the food, and as a result, we got this really incorrectly placed visual diagram on how to eat starting in 1992, re-emphasized again in 2005, and it wasn't replaced until 2011 with MyPlate. There was a lot of criticism against the USDA, a lot of criticism at the food industry, but still there was no significant action taken to correct that, which, if you believe that there's been agency capture, this certainly supports that endpoint. So then in 2011, given the absolute failure of the food pyramid, the USDA provided us a new visual food recommendation in the form of a plate to represent what amount of food from the different food groups we should put on our plate. Half of the plate was fruits and vegetables, a little bit more emphasis on the vegetables. A quarter of the plate was on grains, again, because of the absolute failure of a carbohydrate-rich diet and the resulting obesity that was experienced over those 19 years of using the food pyramid as a nutritional authority. And then a quarter of the plate contains proteins. This did not significantly change the obesity epidemic. There was not clear guidance of how to approach foods. Given this, given the MyPlate, there also was not corresponding recommendations from the FDA, the USDA, from the CDC, from the American Academy of Pediatrics on how to focus on foods despite this ever-increasing epidemic of obesity and diabetes. It was largely ignored. I can say that in medical school, there wasn't a lot of time spent on either the food pyramid or MyPlate. It was quite actually heavily criticized, but even despite the widespread knowledge among the medical community that this was an absolute failure as a method to educate the population on how to eat, no significant change was made by our regulatory bodies or the government oversight institutions. So now here we are in 2026, and we finally have a food pyramid that represents the types of foods that our grandparents ate. It was animal fat heavy, animal protein heavy, and this is really important because animal protein, and specifically red meat, red meat contains an amino acid that is most like our muscles. So when we eat red meat as opposed to chicken or fish or pig, we gain much more nutritional value to help develop proteins inside of our body. If we rely on fish, pork, chicken, or other birds, we need to eat more food in order to receive the same amount of leucine, which is the amino acid that we need as humans to help activate our muscle production. And so you would have to eat more food, which means more calories, in order to get the same amount of leucine. So you eat less calories to get the appropriate amount of leucine from red meats. We have to eat more calories if we're taking it from fish, chicken, birds, or pigs. And if we look at a vegetarian approach that does not contain animal proteins, a vegetarian or vegan approach, then you have to eat 2 to 3 times the amount of protein in order to ingest the appropriate amount of leucine that we need. So you're not going to eat that much of a vegetarian type of protein. So it's quite unrealistic given how our muscles metabolize protein, how they need specific amino acids to grow. This is very important. I know I'm a pediatrician, but this is very important when it comes to muscle management as we get older. We know that every year of life, we lose 1% of our muscle mass starting at the age of 25. And one of the most common ways for an elderly person to lose quality of life is the loss of muscle mass that happens over time. So they can't become as active. They also become less steady on their feet, which can result in an increased chance of falls and broken hips. And once an older person breaks their hip, 50% of them pass away within the next 12 months. So this is very serious, has very serious implications for morbidity and mortality by not providing the right types of food. And so here we are finally receiving the right recommendations with a significant amount of animal fats, animal proteins, and the de-emphasis of the grains, because one, our body's not intended to eat grains like that, as I demonstrated by looking at how we ate farm to table and how God or evolution provided certain types of foods at different types of year, and also seeing that animal proteins are the quintessential type of meat protein that we need in order to keep our muscles and our organ development where it needs to be. So this is a very positive step forward. It does also highlight underneath it, sadly, that there has been industry capture because it took from 1992 to 2026 to finally upright and put right the food pyramid. Thanks a lot for watching.